Ismay.
954.
On Saturday evening, the April the 14th, 1912, the RMS Titanic collided with an iceberg on the high seas about 95 miles south of the Grand Banks of Newfoundland. The following morning at approximately 2:20 a.m, the Titanic sank with the loss of many lives, a total loss of the vessel, her cargo, personal effects, mail and everything connected with the ship except certain lifeboats. Some 1,500 passengers were lost that night. The wonderful work of Tara Beautyman from our production department here at 2UE has put this package together. And bearing in mind, in North America at the moment, it's in the late morning of the 15th of April, 2012, 100 years after the sinking of RMS Titanic. Listen to this.
We were offered a berth in the Titanic. I thought it was wonderful. The whole world was talking about that ship. My mother had this dreadful premonition. She said, no, we can't do this. Something dreadful will happen.
I went on watch at 8 o'clock on that Sunday night, the 14th of April, and immediately got up when the crash came.
I was awakened by the ceasing of the vibration of the boat, and I thought, well, something has happened.
We asked the officers if there was any danger, and said, no, nothing at all, nothing at all. We just hit an iceberg. It's nothing, nothing.
I met a mail clerk coming up, and he said, Mr. Vauxhall, the mail room's filling. And I got my way down to the mail room, and I saw a bag floating by. I realized then that it was serious.
And as it bumped, it sliced off bits of ice, and ice fell all over the deck.
Then we started sending off these distress rockets.
There wasn't any panic until the lifeboats left, and then there was panic galore. We were down on the ocean. We could hear them running about on the decks and screaming.
I could hear everything that was movable was crashing through the ship, and there were people there struggling.
The children were crying and whimpering.
I felt her go down, and then she came up again. Thought it was time to leave her, and so I dropped overboard.
I tumbled into this lifeboat, and we got lowered down. She was being lowered very slowly.
And we rowed away from the ship as fast as we could. And I didn't close my eyes at all.
You could see that she was going down.
This row lights disappeared, the next row lights disappeared.
The stern of that ship stood up in the water for quite a long time, and then keeled over.
I realized that she'd gone, and we heard all the screams.
But the most dreadful sound of all is the sound of people drowning. Absolutely ghastly.
Every star in the heavens was visible, but there was no moon.
Inky black night, and not a ripple in the sea.
The silence that followed it. The whole world stood still that night.
I remember saying, Dad, how could that big ship stay up in the water? Oh, he said, that ship will always stay up in the water. It'll always stay up.
And it's quite remarkable in the United States at the moment. In North America, it's coming up to 2 p.m. in the afternoon of the 15th of April 2012, some 12 hours effectively after the Titanic sank. And it's timely that I can speak with Bobby Livingston, who's the Vice President of RR Auctions. The 100th anniversary Titanic auction commences at 9:30 Eastern Time on Thursday, April the 19th, 2012. 100 years after the Titanic sank, there are some extraordinary pieces of memorabilia linked to personalities and individuals that were aboard the RMS Titanic and that failed to be rescued, but some extraordinary living proof of just the life and the times of many of the passengers. Joining me on the line is Bobby Livingston, the Vice President of RR Auctions. Welcome to New Day Australia. Bobby, you're going right around Australia.
Oh, it's wonderful to be on with you, and listening to the voices of the survivors was a great experience.
What struck me is when I received notification that the 100th anniversary Titanic auction, it's not the only one happening around the world, Bobby, but it's just quite remarkable, some of the items that are going to be auctioned. And I'm just reflecting on some of the items. Let's start with the Titanic deck chair. Now, after the sinking of the Titanic, there was an enormous amount of flotsam, jetsam, and sadly, of course, hundreds and hundreds of bodies that were recovered. It took somewhere in the order of 3 weeks of constant scouring of the area, and you have a Titanic deck chair for auction.
That's right. This particular deck chair was picked up by the recovery ship McKay Bennett that was sent out of Halifax that recovered over 100 bodies, as well as in numerous log entries during the pickup. They talk about picking up deck chairs out of the ocean, and this is one of 7 that is known to still exist. It's an incredible deck chair that was actually made by a contractor in Boston, Massachusetts for the White Star Line. It's just a fabulous piece.
The band on board the Titanic was led by a remarkable man, Wallace Hartley, and you have an extraordinary letter that was actually dated on board the Titanic, and I believe when he left Southampton, he wrote to his dear parents, "My dear parents, just a line to say we have got away all right. It's been a bit of a rush, but I am just getting a little settled. This is a fine ship, and there ought to be plenty of money on her." He continues and writes, and I think that was dated April the 14th and maybe mailed, or excuse me, it was written after the sailing on the 10th of April and was mailed, I think, when they called in either to Cherbourg or into Ireland.
That's correct, and it's an incredible piece because it's on Titanic letterhead. It's dated Wednesday, which would have been April 10th, 1912. And I think most remarkably in the letter, he says, "We have a fine band, and the boys seem very nice." Now, Wallace Hartley had just put together this band. You know, this was their first voyage together. So this is him writing to his parents about the men that would stand with him on that deck on the night of the 14th and the morning of the 15th as the ship sank, and famously played music to calm the first-class passengers. And so many eyewitness accounts talk about the music being heard from the ship as the lifeboats were leaving, and it's quite a remarkable letter and a story. We specialize in documents and handwriting. That's what we do. We've been doing it for 32 years. Every month we've been selling handwritten letters, and this is one of the finest we've ever had because of its historical significance and the iconic person that was Wallace Hartley. His last letter home, heartbreakingly getting to his parents after his death. So it's just remarkable on so many levels.
Just explain to me how an aft grand staircase relic from the aft to the rear of the ship, the grand staircase, there is a relic available. How did this staircase piece survive?
Very similar to the deck chair, the McKay Bennett picked up a lot of property because they were hired by the White Star Line. They had the gruesome job of scooping the bodies out of the ocean, but they also were charged with returning property to shore that was the White Star Line's property. And so a gigantic piece of the grand aft staircase was recovered, and over the years it's been cut into sections, and this is one of the sections. So it's got an incredible, impeccable provenance, and it's a piece of that grand ship.
Lady Duff Gordon was a passenger, I understand, and there was a kimono that is available also. Can you give me some background on Lady Duff Gordon?
Sure. Lady Duff Gordon and her husband Cosmo were some of the wealthiest passengers on the Titanic. Lady Duff Gordon was already at this time a very famous fashion designer, and she had been in Paris. She had shops in Paris and in New York, and she was rushing to return home to New York to deal with some business issues when they got on the Titanic in Cherbourg. When the Titanic first hit the iceberg, Lady Duff Gordon and her husband Cosmo didn't immediately go to lifeboats like many others. They stayed on the ship for several hours, and towards the end, they finally got into what's called the Millionaire's Boat, which oddly and very controversially only had seven passengers and 7 crew members, with room for scores more. And there's a lot of controversy about Lady Duff Gordon and Cosmo and whether they actually bribed the crew to depart. It's one of those controversies. But this is her kimono, that she was wearing as part of her pajamas when she put on her fur coat and her fur hat and left the Titanic. And it was actually still wearing this, obviously, when rescued by Carpathia.
How many of the items that are in this Titanic auction, it's starting at 9:30 Eastern Time on Thursday, April the 19th, from rrauction.com, how many of these items have come directly from descendants of survivors or those that, of course, tragically died, but their bodies were recovered, and in some cases, some of the clothing or mementos, whether it be fob watches or tie pins, were handed to the families? How many of the items are from direct descendants of the Titanic family members?
Well, everything that we have originated in 1912, basically.
Of course.
Nothing that we sell was ever... some of these things have changed hands, but we do have a gold locket from the family of Edward Herbert Keeping, who was the personal valet to George Widener, the famous Philadelphia, Pennsylvania millionaire. His family got this locket when Mr. Keeping's body was recovered by the McKay Bennett and brought to Halifax. Incredibly, in the archives in Halifax, they inventoried every single thing that was on each body, and Keeping was body number 45. And on this manifest, it says he has a gold stick pin and a gold locket. And this locket is remarkable because Mr. Keeping's face was so disfigured during the sinking they couldn't identify him. And he's got a monogram on this locket, EHK, and they used this locket to help identify his body. And it's been on display in Europe for the last 30 years in museums. And for whatever reason, I guess because of the 100th anniversary, the descendants, the great-granddaughter, has decided to place it in our auction. And we're absolutely thrilled to have it because it's rare that descendants of Titanic families are consigning items like this.
I understand. Just finally, there is an extraordinary letter written to Claridge's Hotel Restaurant, Brook Street, London, dated January the 25th, 1910. Dear Sir, it says, I am in receipt of your letter of the 22nd instant and have to advise you it has been decided to install an a la carte restaurant on board the White Star steamers Olympic and Titanic, which are at present being built. I note your view that the only way in which such a restaurant can be kept up to date is by having it run by a large company, such as the Savoy, and when we come to consider its organisation, I will bear your suggestion in mind. I further note that the managing director of the Savoy Company would place himself at my disposal, and should we wish to consult him, will not hesitate to ask his advice. Yours truly. Who signed that letter, Bobby Livingston?
Well, Bruce Ismay, the managing director of the White Star Line and the powerful force behind the Titanic and its opulence and his catering towards the millionaires. Bruce Ismay, who would be vilified in the press as one of the chief causes of the accident and the sinking. You know, Bruce Ismay is that polarizing figure who got into a lifeboat, the last lifeboat, they say, and was saved, while Captain Smith and the other key figures all went down with the Titanic. So he was blamed very much for the accident, but there's no real proof for that. Bruce Ismay, autographs or letters are extremely rare, and one where he actually mentions the Titanic and its building is extremely desirable and one of those pieces in our auction that we're very proud to have.
So the auction starts 9:30 Eastern Time, and that's Eastern Time on the east coast of the United States. This coming Thursday, April the 19th, about 180 items, I believe, in the Titanic collection. For those interested, visit RR Auction. That's R for Robert auction.com. And all the details, people can purchase online, credit cards. There is a buyer's premium attached. But, Bobby, I want to thank you very much for being available to us. It's still Sunday, the 15th of April, on the east coast of the United States. And it would be lovely to speak again next week just to get a sense of the total sales value of the 180 items that are being sold in this quite historic centenary Titanic auction.
We're very grateful that you had us on today, and we would be very thrilled to talk to you next week as well.
Thank you, Bobby. Bobby Livingston, the Vice President of RR Auctions, for the centenary auction sale of some of the memorabilia from the RMS Titanic.
2UE.
If I'm not listening to it, I feel like I'm missing out on something.
Instant, interactive, the original social network. Call now, 13 13 32.